David Brewster here with a new episode of Soloing Secrets, and this is Chuck Berry, and I've had some requests to feature more of Chuck's music, and if you search on my channel, there's a 3-for-all from a couple years ago, surrounding Chuck, but this is the first time we've really done a deep dive on this legendary icon and pioneer of the electric guitar and rock and roll music, and definitely Chuck is essential. His career started somewhere around 1953, and then during his, career, he released 20 studio albums, 12 live albums, 31 compilations, 50 singles, and 8 of those songs were top 10 hits, and 13 of those songs were top 10 hits on the R&B charts. Definitely, Chuck Berry is the legendary king of rock and roll. So much like we've done in other episodes in the Soloing Secrets series, when you're checking out a certain guitarist or band, it's always a good idea to scope out their influences, which will reveal certain things that pop up in their music, licks and phrases and playing habits and stuff like that. And with Chuck, it's really interesting because a lot of the guitarists we've looked at in the series were influenced by Chuck Berry, but now we're looking at Chuck Berry. So his influences are even earlier, and it's really interesting to note, Louis Jordan, and specifically Louis's guitarist Carl Hogan was a direct influence on Chuck Berry, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But here's a list of some of Chuck's elusive musical influences. So I'm really excited to share this because this really is the epitome of Soloing Secrets and a lot of things that happen here on the Late Night Lessons channel as far as, looking at influences and learning licks and kind of borrowing ideas and reshaping ideas, reworking music. And that's what all musicians and artists do. I'm sorry if you don't agree with me, but all artists borrow and sometimes flat out steal ideas from other artists, whether they're musicians or painters or sculptors or whatever. And with Chuck Berry, definitely Louis Jordan's song Ain't That Just Like a Woman, with the intro played by Carl Hogan, that was a direct influence on Chuck Berry. And I think it really, just kind of knocked his socks off. Obviously, he learned the song, but then he reworked that intro part, and eventually it became Johnny Be Good. But if you haven't heard that song before, definitely check it out, especially if you're a Chuck Berry fan. Listen to Ain't That Just Like a Woman, and then listen to Chuck Berry, and you'll hear that direct link or influence. Now this is really impressive too as far as some of the artists and musicians that Chuck worked with in his career. And keep in mind, there's some really big names. Willie Dixon, Otis Spawn, the Chess Brothers, Michael Bloomfield, Bo Diddley. There's a whole bunch of people. But here's some of the people that Chuck worked with in his career. And this is really just the 50s and 60s. I kind of filled up this image. I didn't even get into the 70s and 80s and beyond, Keith Richards and Aretha Franklin and Eric Clapton and people like that. But here's some of the early people that Chuck worked with, back in the 50s and 60s. As far as Chuck's actual soloing secrets, the things he typically liked to do when he'd pick up a guitar and play a lick or a fill or a solo, and there's a lot. Definitely there's a big blues influence and, minor pentatonic and modified blues phrasing and stuff. Lots of double stops, unusual bending. But then Chuck also had country influences too, and you can kind of hear that, some weird kind of quirky bends and stuff. Very interesting guitarist and very diverse as far as, blues influences, some jazz. Definitely he was into Charlie Christian too. So definitely, his soloing secrets kind of reveal a lot of different things from different styles of music. The music and examples in this episode came from 5 Chuck Berry related albums. Technically, one of those albums is not Chuck Berry, so technically 4 Chuck Berry albums, and then there's a 5th selection. We'll talk about that too. But it's really interesting to notice, his legacy and start going through, some of his albums, whether it's the actual studio recordings or the singles or compilations, the live stuff. There's a lot to dig through. So I basically targeted very specific things in different areas, in Chuck's playing style, signature licks and phrases and stuff. And it's really going to give you kind of a bird's eye view of where he was coming from, and then how you can borrow some of these ideas and turn them into your own licks and phrases and solos. So anyway, here we go. Okay, we'll get into what I played during the opening jam in just a second, but the first thing we're going to tackle here or approach are Chuck's double stops. This is an essential and necessary, thing in Chuck's music, and we have to start here. And this first idea is basically a fill from No Particular Place to Go, which is from the album St. Louis to Liverpool, and it's just a short, simple fill, but like this. Really short and sweet, really easy to play too. So we're in G right there, and you're literally just sliding into that double stop on the B and the high E on the 3rd fret. Hit it again, and then you've got 2 double stops there, the G and the B on the 5th fret, G and the B on the 3rd fret, and then just end on that single D note, like that. It's just a really simple fill from No Particular Place to Go. And another fill that appears in that song, it kind of moves out of that position, but it kind of borrows like a movement that's in that first fill, because we did this, and that other fill, like that, and you're literally just kind of moving into that D and that F note, and then you're back into those double stops and that single G. So there's 2 fills from No Particular Place to Go using double stops. This one and this one. Really simple stuff, but essential, Chuck Berry building blocks. Okay, next up's a fill from the song School Days. This came from the album After School Session, and this is something that happens a lot in Chuck's, music, is the way he would recycle and kind of rework licks and phrases and intro solos and stuff. So this is similar to what we saw in No Particular Place to Go, but it's a little different, like this. One more time. So there you can see we're sliding into that double stop on the 3rd fret, and then we're sliding into this, D and F again, and then those 2 single, double stops, and then that single G again. So it does seem like as soon as you tackle one, song or lick, in Chuck Berry's music, then it pops up and appears somewhere else. And sometimes it pops up multiple times, like that. A tight little fill, but it fits in the rhythm of that song, and it's essential, Chuck Berry. Now, as far as uncovering where these double stops come from, we can just basically go back to a minor pentatonic scale and start building double stops from there. And I suspect that's kind of where Chuck, was coming from with a lot of these double stop ideas. So just grab like a G minor pentatonic box right here. But then instead of playing the notes one at a time or single notes, start doubling those notes like that. Double 6, double 5, or I'm sorry, double 6, double 3, and then that 5 and 6 to double 3, double 5 to double 3, double 5, double 3, and then 6, 5 to double 3. So that's, minor pentatonic played all double stops. And then you could start kind of mutating that and do, that kind of stuff where we're literally just grabbing that double stop and sliding it right there. Do the same thing on the G and the B string. And you could actually do it on the D and the G too. Double stops right there. Something like that. It's just kind of giving you some double stop, action to kind of work with, but that's essential, in Chuck Berry's music. Next up's a classic lick from Around and Around. This is from Chuck Berry Is on Top, which is arguably one of Chuck Berry's best albums. It has a whole bunch of hits on it, but this lick has definitely been around the block, more times than a kid with a new bicycle. Something like this. Really basic stuff here, keep in mind. Building blocks, right? But now we're in B, and he's really just grabbing a double stop here like this. And then, that 9th fret double stop there on the G and the B. And then this, minor to major 3rd hammer on. And then back to the double stop he started with. Like that. Really basic movements, but you have to think of how influential some of these licks and phrases were. That was a long time ago. That's the beginning of rock and roll right there. Next up's the intro to the song Carol. This is also from the album Chuck Berry Is on Top, and it's something like this. One more time. So right there, now we're in C, right? And you can see he's basically doing this minor to major, third hammer on, like that. So basically E flat to E, and then this G to A note. And then you hear him grab double stops right there on the top. Right, so that's kind of functioning as C. Then you hear the same lick again, but then he mashes this. And that's kind of like an implied F9 right there. But he's just playing the top part, right? Then he goes back to C again. And then you hear him end with this double stop bend on the 10th fret on the G and the B string. And he just kind of bends it to nowhere. Okay, now it's time for me to reveal what I played during the opening jam. That wasn't a Chuck Berry song. That was actually Ain't That Just Like a Woman by Louis Jordan, and that guitar part played by Carl Hogan. And, I think Chuck learned that. Obviously, Chuck really liked that guitar part in that song, but he learned that and then reworked it, and mutated it, and changed the single notes into double stops, and then fast forward, about 10 years, and it became Johnny Be Good eventually. But, so I didn't want to confuse anybody, but that definitely wasn't Chuck Berry, but it directly inspired and influenced Chuck, like this. Right. So we're in G right there, way up on the fretboard, and just think of G minor pentatonic right here. But we're sliding in like that, and that totally has that Chuck Berry kind of setup right there, right? I think that happens in like 100 Chuck Berry songs, but there it is, in the Louis Jordan song. And then you're just grabbing that single G on top. Right, like that. And then, I'm hearing slides a lot in there, and that's an interesting, intro guitar part. Next up's the opening lick from Roll Over Beethoven. This is from the album Chuck Berry Is on Top, and like this. Time. So now we're in E flat right there, and he starts that same way, right? That signature like opening, grab a double stop there. Then he starts doing these crafty slides and shifts like that. So it's mostly slid, right? And then he kind of saves that last slide, sliding from the minor into the major third. Really crafty. Classic lick right there. Next up's the opening to the song Guitar Boogie. This came from the album 1 Dozen Berries. Something like this. One more time. So now we're in G, and we're down here, and we're doing this D to an E hammer on, and then you just start mashing and banging on this double stop there on the 3rd fret on the B and the high E. And then right there, grab this E and that B flat, and you're going to bend that E like a half step. So that kind of sour, smeared bend. And then do that hammer on again and the double stop again. And then right here, he's basically doing a rockabilly, like pull-off lick. And like G hybrid pentatonic right there. Right? Next up's a lick from the song Sweet Little Rock and Roller. This also came from the album Chuck Berry is on Top, and there's a sweep hiding in this lick. Check this out. One more time. So we're in G once again, and we're actually sweeping right here. Like that, like a little part of a G major arpeggio right there. And then grab that E to F. And end on that G up there. So it's kind of like a raked sweep, but you're playing an arpeggio. So in my book, that's totally a sweep right there. And then you're going to basically shift slide into that A and then catch that C note. And then you're going to shift slide into this B and grab that D note. Like that. And he basically keeps doing that slide and ends up picking that B note twice like that. So do that 3 times in a row. And then he starts grabbing this B flat and bends that a half step to B while also playing that D on top. Like that. One more time. Okay, last but not least is a very unusual bend that takes place during the No Particular Place to Go guitar solo. So now we're back on that song. And you're going to hear in that solo, you're going to hear him bend this. Which is very unusual. And during the solo, he's doing... That's really weird and definitely sounds kind of out of tune and on edge, but I think that's the whole point. And basically what Chuck's doing here is he's really just playing a G triad, like G major. But instead of doing that, he's actually starting a half step lower, you know, this G flat and that B flat, and he's holding that D note on the high E, and then he's going to bend those 2 notes on the G and the B a half step. So that's weird. It's like a weird pedal steel lick or something. Because you're literally, you're doing that, but with a bend. It's really hard to do, and it's really hard to play in tune, too. Because it seems like as soon as you get one of the bent strings in tune, the other one's out of tune, and then you start kind of fudging with it. It's really hard to get it perfectly in tune, but it's really just that obnoxious texture and sound, I feel. And you hear Chuck doing... Then eventually he starts doing... It definitely kind of reminds me of like Angus Young or somebody, Jimmy Page right there. You know, classic, timeless licks right there, and that weirdo bend. Alright, that's going to wrap this episode of Soloing Secrets of this look at Chuck Berry. Definitely an essential, timeless, you know, pioneer, icon, influenced everybody. The Beatles loved Chuck Berry. Hendrix and Clapton and Jimmy Page and Keith Richards and the gang, everybody loved Chuck Berry. And it's really interesting to notice, like, he really did kind of start the template of electric rock and roll guitar. You know, bending licks and double stop ideas and bringing blues licks and country licks over into rock, you know, music. Very important and essential, you know, and I've talked to so many people about Chuck Berry. Friends and former students and family members and, you know, just all sorts of stuff. I mean, his music and his influence and his legacy is very, very well documented, but it's also very important to realize, like, Chuck really did start the rock and roll fire, or at least in my book. I mean, along with Little Richard and Bo Diddley, of course. I mean, he wasn't the only one, but in my mind, I mean, he was definitely leading the pack, kind of leading the charge. As soon as he hit the scene, everybody stopped and noticed Chuck Berry. And definitely, I mean, that continued all the way through his lifetime. He passed away back in 2017. And since that time, I've talked to a lot of people about Chuck Berry, either talking about his guitar playing or his music, or some of the antics, you know, off stage that he was known for. But definitely timeless, essential. I'm a huge Chuck Berry fan. And he is sorely missed. We could use a Chuck Berry again, I think, right now. Maybe a dozen Chuck Berries. But anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.